It's very hard for those of us who grew up, with movements around love and kindness and justice and freedom to want to have that, like the level of fight that it takes to stomp out white supremacy, to stop out patriarchy, to stomp out the misogyny and the homophobia. You got to want to take off your earrings, right?
Yeah. It's like a good dirty fight. It's not a polite fight.
It's a dirty fight.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan DeBaun, a passionate entrepreneur and life advisor. With the Journey podcast, you'll discover that success isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. I'm sharing stories of amazing people who've taken control of their lives. Join me on my own journey to discover the secret sauce behind reaching success with permission from no one else. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Journey podcast. I am here today with Alexis McGill Johnson. Today we're talking all things reproductive health, the responsibility of businesses and business owners to provide benefits and rights to their employees. And if you are in the social impact space and you're building a social enterprise, this is the episode for you because we're going to talk about how you can make change with your work and how to get other people to buy into that. Fun fact, I raised my first round of venture funding from social impact investors. Typical venture capitalists did not want to invest in Blavity. They didn't want to invest in me. They didn't want to invest in our business. It felt too risky for them. Social impact investors were people who saw that, hey, if this business does work, not only will it make money, it'll help change minds. It'll help change industries. It'll help push the culture to a more progressive front. And the type of business that Morgan is going to build, most likely, given who she is going to be better for society. And thank God they were right. Everybody made a good bet on me. And there's a lot of people licking their wounds for not taking the original investment. But what was really important to me is also those were people who were mission aligned with my business. And so they've been able to push me over the last 10 years to build a business that was true to the word that I set out 10 years ago. Alexis, welcome to the Journey podcast. Thank you for coming. And first, just checking in. How are you doing today?
Oh my goodness. I'm healthy. My family's healthy. The world is crazy. Just when you think you're making progress, you get sent back to 1864. So there are moments when you're like, oh my gosh, but no, it's good to be here. And I love the part of your story where you're getting backing from social impact investors because the markets don't always align with where you think the people are, right? They're not just buying widgets or services. Like they're people who think and believe and want to invest in those ways. And so I love that.
Yeah, thank you. It was only because of brute force. I'd like to say I was a genius, but it was because I failed and it was hard. So I guess I'm curious, talk to me a little bit about how Planned Parenthood is structured. As CEO of Planned Parenthood, you guys have a multitude of entities. You've got your PACs, you've got all types of things going on. Walk me through how it's set up.
Yeah. So Planned Parenthood is the nation's largest sexual and reproductive healthcare provider. I am the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is important because we are a federation of 49 affiliates. Those are the local affiliates in states that provide the healthcare directly to patients when you go into the health centers. And I lead the national office, and we help create the conditions for the affiliates to deliver their care. I'm also the president of the Action Fund, which is our C4 work. The C3 nonprofit side is the care side. The C4 is really about defending the mission, right? We know that healthcare is politicized and has been for really since the beginning of time. And the need, particularly in this moment, to vigorously defend it is our Action Fund work. And as a part of the Action Fund, we have kind of political giving, which is how we fund candidates, how we move policy, how we engage in electoral cycles. And so we have, electorally appropriate vehicles that allow us to engage in that conversation, but it's all in defense of the mission, which is care.
And how big is the federation at large? You said 44.
49 affiliates. 49. Yeah. So collectively, there are about 10,000 workers inside of the federation. Our affiliates see about 2.4 million patients a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is, on a full range and full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health care, from STI testing and contraception to breast cancer screenings and abortion, where we can provide. And it's also education, it's litigation, it's policy creation. So it's like all of the elements of what it takes to maintain and protect bodily autonomy here in the U.S.
I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I grew up in the county of St. Louis. I don't know if the Planned Parenthood in St. Louis is still open. Is it still open? Mm-hmm. So that's like maybe 4 or 5 blocks from my high school. And I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. And obviously I'm very progressive. That's not a secret. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows me at this point. Every year, the juniors at my high school would go to, is it the March for Life? March for Life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was this all girls Catholic school. It was this whole social peer pressure thing where like all the girls who were going to DC were like little baby goddesses basically at school. And I was just like, and they would go and they would protest at the Planned Parenthood, because it's down the street. So it was like one of the volunteer activities you could do. And it was just like mind-boggling to me, the indoctrination at such an early age at an all-girls school where, the 2 girls in my senior year were pregnant. So I'm like, what are we really talking about here? So, how do you even start to think about the social conditioning that happens at such a young age in certain parts of this country? Like, how should we as people who are now leaders of organizations and operating at the local level, regional level, national politics, we'll get there in a second, but just like a local, regional level, like how is it that we start to have these conversations with organizations that we maybe even be a part of the institutions?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say it because my girls are in all girls school too. And it's like, I'm really grateful that they're having an education, right? And you think about even the formation of girls' schools, right? Largely in response to the marginalization and exclusion of women, those who identify as women in society. And you're like, how can you not in this moment really understand and respect what is happening to our bodies? And I see them, very early on engaging in conversations around what does it really mean to be free? What does it really mean to express things like consent? What does it mean to, protect yourself in environments where you may feel like you don't have control? It starts from, the kinds of conversations you have at a very young age to like, then how do you express that politically? How do you express that in the things that you want to stand and fight for? And I think there has just been this incredible shift, right? I mean, so, we're a generation that has grown up into the rights, right? I was born, 5 or 6 months before Roe. And so I've never not worried about having access to anything, right? And to know that my 2 girls are now going to grow up in a world where depending on where they choose to live or go to school or work, they may have a completely different experience than I have had. And so we talk a lot about that, in house. I mean, Planned Parenthood provides a lot of education resources as well. But at home, we talk a lot about kind of what the implications of that are and what are they really saying behind it, right? Because it is about healthcare. It is about access to healthcare, but implicit in taking away that right, they're also telling us, we don't think that you know how to make these decisions for yourselves, right? We don't trust you to do that, which means we don't think that you're actually equal, which means like there is something about the audacity of equality that we have been fighting for the last, half century or longer, 400 years, that makes you wonder where they really are trying to take us backwards to. And I think infusing all of those into conversations, particularly with young people in this moment, they get it. Like they get it so clearly.
I think what's hard to conceptualize, and I felt this way when Trump won his first election, was like, I think that sometimes we have this perception of, no, people can't be that strategic. Like this isn't that calculated. Like that's really, there's a lot of things that I'm like, no, like, people aren't that evil. Like you just don't want to believe that I'll speak for myself. I don't want to believe that there's really people out here plotting to control women and women who identify as women. And I think it's hard for me to conceptualize too, because I'm like, IVF babies. Like, I know you all have abortions with your lady friends. Like, what are we talking about here? So how would you recommend that someone like me who, it's not like a cognitive dissonance because it's also happening right in front of our eyes. How would you recommend that we start to ground ourselves like, no, this is actually happening?
I mean, there's nothing like Dobbs to help us understand like this is actually happening. So like, let me take you back to the Supreme Court leak in 22 in May. It's one of those moments where like, I remember, right? Like where I was standing, what I was wearing, who I called first, like, because it was just, even in this work, even though we knew this would happen. We'd been watching the courts turn for a decade. We've been watching the state houses turn for a decade. And if it wasn't Dobbs, it would have been any number of about 18 cases that would have been the trigger to blow up Dobbs. But it was like this moment where we couldn't actually believe it. It was just so intangible.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have it happen and to see, where we are right now, like 21 states have essentially criminalized abortion, where, those first stories that started to come out about just the chaos and confusion that was happening on the ground, doctors not knowing what to do, right? Sending, is there an exception for life here? Well, how sick are you really? So why don't you go wait until the parking lot until sepsis starts to set in. And when you start to feel like you're almost going to die, like come back in. Like I remember hearing those stories at the beginning and I was like, no, like, okay, people, there has to be some common sense in how this gets applied. And then you realize once you take the private medical decisions away from the people with the actual expertise, like the providers or the people who are making the decision, like the patients, and you give it to politicians, what you are doing is you are sowing a whole bunch of uncertainty and risk and liability into that work. And so we have seen now that the devastation on patients who are traveling thousands of miles to get access to care or being stuck in state, being forced into pregnancy, we are seeing the fact that abortion bans make pregnancy more dangerous because doctors don't know what they can do in order to help save lives. And in fact, in Louisiana, some are doing preemptive C-sections, right? Like just craziness rather than provide the safe abortion care that they can. And we're seeing how much risk they are introducing into what is already, pregnancy is not an easy, condition, right? It is fraught with a lot of potential complications. And so really naming what those risks are and helping people understand now in real time, we have stories that are just demonstrating how difficult these decisions that people are making under extreme circumstances and hostile.
Absolutely. I have a 5-month-old baby. So I just went through, and I live in Tennessee. So Tennessee's not quite there, but it's getting really weird over here. I remember when I was pregnant and we chose to do the genetic testing, and we had to have a conversation of what if this and what if this, and say, I actually don't even know the law. Like, I don't know the laws. Like, I don't know the rules. Now I have the financial means. If I need to fly to California or whatever, like I can. As of now, you can move across states. But I'm sure at some point that's probably also on the table that you can't cross state lines, right?
They have been testing that law right now. They're testing it right now with respect to minors. And can you imagine, like, even just saying that? Like, I should be able to travel across state lines. But like, what if what you're really asking is, what if a state can hold me hostage?
Wow.
Right? Because think about it. Think about what happened in Alabama a few weeks ago when that Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court had that ruling, that really kind of insane ruling likening embryos to children. And how it immediately shut down the industry, the processes that, people were in mid-process related to IVF transfer, and they could not get their embryos out because the transportation companies didn't want to assume the liability of transferring embryos across state lines. So like you see, like it has a ripple effect. It's
that's terrible. How devastating for those families.
Devastating. Can you imagine, like, you're going in for your implantation and you have a window. You have on this day, at this hour, after this injection, right, that you have been planning for, that you have been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on. And then they're like, nope, sorry.
My heart breaks for those women and those families. I also I was thinking about freezing my eggs. I'm 34. I don't want to have another kid anytime soon, but like maybe later. Yeah. But I'm like, wait, do I need to consider where I freeze my egg? Yes. This is terrible.
Yeah. Yes. And also, if we end up with a hostile administration coupled with a hostile Congress, and we already have a hostile Supreme Court, it may not matter where you freeze your eggs, right? Because we're also living in a world where, okay, are we going to accept that there's some free states and, slaves? Like, we're back to, again, 1864. Like, what does that actually look like right now? But if we get, a trifecta of an administration that is empowered to enact a national ban, because you see IVF, contraception, All of these things are part of the full spectrum of reproductive freedom or reproductive healthcare, including abortion, that where the line gets drawn is subject to the interpretation from these folks.
Those three groups.
Yes. Yes. That's the scary thing. That's what's actually on the line. And you see how much power they have built to try to make that happen.
I think that what you're saying right now for me is really important because I, like many other people, feel disappointed with the current administration at the federal level. And by no means am I voting for Donald Trump, but I also really struggle with voting for Joe Biden and Kamala. And what I have to continue to remind myself when my brain is like, I don't want to vote for these people, is I'm not voting for these people. Like, I'm voting for democracy. I'm voting for the balance of power. I'm voting for a better balance of power. I may not agree with how the power is being used, but I can certainly agree with everyone being a part of the same party and have the same mindset, Congress, presidential, and Supreme Court, that's bad for democracy. Like, I can agree to that. It's a shame that we're at that point where I'm like rationalizing it, but I also think that because that's where a lot of people are right now, it's important that we talk about, hey, what is at stake at the federal and regional level that actually impacts you as a human being, not someplace overseas, not some people not in like your backyard, your body. Everyone should resonate with that.
No. And I appreciate you naming the challenges that people are experiencing related to this election. It's a very complicated election, like without question. And democracy, like there's a reason why abortion rights and democracy were the closing argument in 2020 and 2022, like to really understand that, first of all, watching a country descend into authoritarianism and consolidate power and control in really arbitrary, capricious people, is completely antithetical to what democracy is. And when you have people who are aligning with a theocracy, right, with Christian nationalism, where they have an ideology based on where they think we should show up, right? Not just as women of color, as like all of those ways. The very first thing that we have seen authoritarian dictatorships do or governments do is take away reproductive freedom, because that is literally, you can control half the population.
Are there other countries that have done that?
Oh, yeah. No, it's literally the first thing you do. Like, it's the playbook for authoritarianism, right? The first.
And when you say authoritarianism, it's when one group controls all the powers. Like, what is define authoritarian?
A form of government that is consolidated among a small group of folks, or a dictator, right? That is controlling all the rules, right? It's like, there are kind of variations of it. And when it shows up, it's not just a consolidation of power, right? Because you can have consolidation of one party covering three branches and still have a democratic process that advances those policies. This looks like, what the former president's former team has put out, right, in their future playbook for 2025, that we want to abolish the, HHS, the Health and Human Services Agency. We want to abolish the Department of Education. We want to dictate, what you cannot teach anymore, because we don't want people to understand their history, because if they understand their history, they'll know that what we're doing is wrong, right? We want to take away access to, all forms of reproductive health care, up until including abortion and gender affirming care. Like, so all of the ways in which you have given the keys to the kingdom, literally, right? The keys of power to a group of tyrants, right? A group of authoritarians who want to rule, with an iron fist. And we heard the former president say, oh yeah, they think I want to be a dictator. Yep, I do. For my first day, these are all the things that I'm going to do. Yeah. And so I think that those are the kinds of things that, honestly, it would be silly, a few years ago to say, like, here we are in the year of our Lord, 2024, thinking like this could actually be the thing that could happen. And yet you're actually saying these are the things that they want.
Saying it. That's where I'm trying to resist the urge that I felt when it was Hillary versus Trump. I'm like, this can happen. What are we talking about? And then it happens, right? And then so we're talking about it. And then a year from now, I don't want to be like, oh man, we knew.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh my God, totally.
They said it. And we just sat there and just ate our olive oil and butter and cheese and crackers. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, we need to be fighting. So, I just want to transition to that a little bit. So I'm a small business owner. When I became a small business owner, I did not think about my HR policies and my benefits policies. I was like, I want to solve a problem. I want to build a thing. I want to build a platform. This is the community I want to help. And along the way, as we've gotten bigger, I have now also had to think through, well, what kind of like social citizen are we going to be? We're privately owned. And how far is too far? What is a small business owner's responsibility to speak up? Are we going to be political? Are we not going to be political? Are things like our benefits policies, am I making a political statement by having certain policies? And it's actually been something that I've like really had to work through. Our company's only 200 people. So big, but relative.
Yeah, that's not a small, I mean, that's a small business, but that's a significant amount of people for.
Yeah, we're a big, small business, And so, but the burden of like benefits, it's still significant. I mean, it's like, these are big costs that I'm carrying. Yeah. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what is your advice to a small business owner that is now, let's call it a 30 to 50 person business. So actually let's call it 50 because 50 is kind of that number where the rules change, where they start to consider the livelihood of their employees. What are some advice that you would give them? Because this stuff does cost a lot of money. The burden is a lot on the private company.
Yeah. I mean, so right after Dobbs, what we saw was a number of companies that had come through Floyd and the racial reckoning and all of the race conversations, the voting rights conversations where they had taken stands, and Dobbs came and they were not quite sure what to do or how to think about it. And they kind of starting to kind of take a step back from where the majority of people are, away from kind of what they thought were like politically fraught decisions. And so the way they solved for that was to create travel benefits, right? So like inside of your policy, whatever your healthcare benefit is, if you work for us in a Tennessee, in a Arkansas, Idaho, like we will get you out of state. Right? We will take responsibility for getting you out of state. That can be covered in your benefits. Some real practical implications to that, right? Like from the worker standpoint, how do you engage that benefit? How do you request the time off?
That's why we've been in our own conversation. I'm like, I would love to support this. Are people going to be okay like saying this? And then what's the social impact culturally within the company?
Yes. And so like, again, how all of this stuff operationalizes becomes a challenge because you're taking away even more of the privacy in what should be a private medical decision. Now, you could also be in a state, in states like Tennessee and others have been engaged in conversations around like, what information can they ask and demand from a public standpoint, right? That they're retracting from doing the accounting of what's happening with maternal mortality and releasing those numbers and now saying, well, we want to build a database of anybody who is seeking to access reproductive health care, including abortion or gender affirming care in our state. So they're using the mechanisms of power of the state, which is why we have to stay engaged in democracy, because they're there because they have been elected. Yes. And when they're there, they're using the power to really undo so many, freedoms and equalities. And they're wielding it with ways that are actually really, what's the word? Like they're doing it way that's like, what did you say?
I said draconian.
Draconian. That's actually what I was looking for. Like
this is
abusive,
medieval.
It is medieval and abusive. And so I think, as a company, it's like you have to explore what will it look like from a benefit standpoint and kind of understand the implications of that. You have to understand what kind of information your state is thinking about and collecting around it and what processes your insurer needs to go through. And then I think you have to ask questions, right? Like you are doing business in a state and for many reasons, it could be from where you're from. It could be, where you've always been. A lot of companies over the years have relocated to states like Texas and Florida for their benefits, benefits of lower taxes and deregulation and so forth, right? But what responsibility do they have for engaging in the community and the local politics? You can't want lower taxes on one hand and deregulation and then sacrifice half of your workforce on the other, because we know 50% of the workforce coming out, larger than 50%, are going to be people who may need access to reproductive health care. So what choices are you making and how are you having those conversations to really help the lawmakers in your state understand what the economic implications are?
Right. And I think what's hard for me, I am glad that I'm not the CEO of Disney or Amazon or a company that employs ginormous amounts of people, because it's like, I'm the CEO of a business. I did not sign up to be the CEO of politics for these things. But because of the way our country is set up, a lot of these CEOs are, by obligation to their employees and their talent base, having to have a point of view, right? And answer those questions. And behind closed doors, I know they're calling you because they need advice. So how are you guiding them? because they also have to respond to their shareholders. And there's the whole like anti-woke conversations. How are you advising them to tackle these issues in a way? Like, what are the talking points that you give them if they're about to have an earnings call and these types of things come up?
So I think you're absolutely right. Like at the end of the day, yes, it is critically important to stand, live your values. We know there's a return on investment from a consumer standpoint, right? I mean, we can make brands and we can break them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they understand the power of what that means. So we have conversations around like, are you truly aligned with your values, and how are you showing up, and where can you push on those? Because I think it's important to start with like what they say their corporate values are and their belief in equity and equality and so forth. Then I think it's a conversation around strategic business interests, right? As I said, you are choosing to do business in a state where, the laws have changed drastically. Your ability to recruit people to come in and, like we're seeing this in the universities now, like people saying, I'm not going to send my kid to a Big Ten school in a state with these bans. I'm not going to go to a work conference or be forced to go to a work conference if I'm 30 weeks pregnant. Like there are all kinds of kind of calculations that people are making, and you're going to have to make accommodations for them. The other thing that we are seeing now, right, again, in the name of recruiting or retaining real top talent, is that in many of the states, there was a 10% decline of OBGYN residents matching into banned states.
They don't want the risk.
They don't want the risk. And that's coupled with, you said you're 34, you just had your first child. I was 37 at my first child. I was actually at advanced geriatric maternal.
Oh, stop. I guess I'll be there next year. So
you're not far behind, girl. It's like literally, it's like advanced maternal age.
So like I just got here. What are we talking about?
But what's important there is like you jump into a new category, right, around high risk maternal health. And so you have those doctors with that very delicate expertise that is needed for the most complicated procedures. They don't want to be in those states practicing because they're worried about their life. Am I going to get arrested because I made an executive decision in a moment to save a life, or, what have you? And I don't have time to call up to the third floor to talk to corporate and a lawyer to figure this out. And so you're losing the expertise. You're losing the people who actually want to practice in state. And we've seen in a state like Idaho, they've closed labor and delivery wards. Whole wards. People traveling 3 hours in a rural state to get access to abortion. No. And so like you have to think about that from a business standpoint, right? So then what does that mean for my
employees there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I want to shift gears in our last 10 minutes together to talk about going back to smaller organizations, nonprofits, people who are building social impact nonprofits. You are running the largest social impact organization, probably the largest, if not like,
sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're the largest. Yeah. So fundamentally, you are changing hearts and minds. You're doing advocacy. You're also running a large organization. You're interacting with donors. How would you recommend someone at the early stages of trying to build their movement? What kind of leadership skills do you think that are like critical for someone who wants to be in your position one day?
Oh, it's such a great question. I can just answer by saying my approach to leadership is I was actually started out as a mathematician undergrad before I switched to political science. But there is something about solving the equation that's really important. There's something about really understanding what you were solving for and thinking about how you then create a birth of potential solutions that you can test and try and innovate around in order to do that. Movement work is, we've been in movement for centuries, right? Fights for freedom and equality are not new to this moment or new to this country or new to us, right? Particularly as women of color. But there is something about kind of how the world has changed around us, and the problems that kind of our ancestors were fighting are fundamentally different than the ones that we are, fighting right now. And so I think it's about having a healthy framework in your mind around what it actually takes to really see a problem and start to think about. There is also a way in which it can be very easy to get lured into solving the immediate, right? I heard someone describe it the other day as like the tyranny of the short-term decisions, where you are, oh my God, I got to fight Florida. I got to fight. Oh, wait, no, this happened. Oh, wait, the court's going to do this, right? And so you're constantly trying to move staff and resources and conversations around kind of these immediate things that come up. And it's really rarely the successful leader that stays on that path for too long, because you find you have to resource the long-term strategic thinking. You know, in the middle of Dobbs, we were putting together a plan, not just for the immediate response to Dobbs in 22, but really starting to say, okay, what is 24 going to look like? And how are we planning to 2040? Because if they're going to kick us out of the Constitution, we need a long-term roadmap to get back in. So what does that mean? What states do we have to win? How are we going to like block and tackle? Because the thing that we know, and this is the other thing I tell corporates all the time, is that you know, you're afraid to make a decision. You're afraid to behave right now because you think that this is a polarized issue. And in fact, 85% of Americans believe, right, that they should be able to make these private medical decisions. They don't want politicians making them. And you can just stand with the 85% and be fine, right? And so how do you actually bring them into that conversation in a way that helps them also see their role in the long term, right? So really starting to block and tackle, you know, and then to really understand your opposition. You know, I would say that movement work is happening, right? Because we are trying to move people, right? We're trying to move past the status quo. And the people who are protecting the status quo have a invested interest in being there. And they are going to put everything they can in. And I think it's very hard for those of us who grew up, you know, with movements around love and kindness and justice and freedom to want to have that, like the level of fight that it takes to stomp out white supremacy, to stop out patriarchy, to stomp out the misogyny and the homophobia. You're like, you got to want to like take off your earrings, right?
It's like a good dirty fight. It's not a polite fight.
It's a dirty fight. And so you have to be willing to push yourself there too. Because I guarantee you the other side is waking up thinking every day about how they can undermine you and undermine your work. And that's what we have to protect.
That's right. I think that's really important framework for people to think about. I think that your note about not being reactive, constantly reacting to the intermediary things, because then you never have time to invest in the big long-term strategy and the small steps that you have to take consistently to shift things. And not something that even with Blavity I've tried to embody. It's like, yes, I see what so-and-so is doing over here. I see what this company's doing over here. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we're already working towards something 2-3 years away. And they want us to be distracted. I call it sumo. They're the sumo. We're the little guy. They want us to be distracted by all this stuff. So you've got to stay focused. Don't even talk to me about these people. Stay focused. We know what the plan is. We have not finished the plan. You got to execute. And I think when you're the little guy, it can feel overwhelming if you're constantly reacting to everything that's happening. I do think from a perspective of someone who's trying to convince other people to care, sometimes using the reaction as a hook to get somebody to care, I do think is very, very successful. My question for you is, how do you leverage some of these moments where it's like, yeah, we saw this coming a mile away, but the average person didn't. And so we're shocked. We're like, oh, this audacity of an embryo, you know, and you're like, Morgan, this has been like on the docket for it's been happening. And then also it's really like watching a slow motion train wreck happening. You're seeing it go and you're trying to stop it and you're trying to put all your fingers in the dams. And, you know, the thing I remind my federation of all the time is that we are a critical part of the public healthcare infrastructure. Yes.
But we are not the government.
No.
Right. And so our job, you know, part of why I'm the president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is the care side, and also the mission side, which is the C4, is, you know, we have to fight for our ability to deliver care. And we have to make sure that we are able to bring the fight into opening up more access to public dollars and resources to provide. Sometimes we're the first point of entry into the healthcare system.
Entirely for them.
Right. And so we're carrying the burden of and the opportunity to reach so many people and put them on a journey to healthcare without the resourcing to do it. It is about constantly finding that balance. We knew this would happen, so we built patient navigation system to help people move more fluidly through the system. We, digital technology and and actual people like a concierge, like, okay, bus is going to pick you up. I'm going to stay on the phone with you, all of that, it's really what I call, Morgan, an infrastructure of hope. Like people have chosen, they've made a decision for their lives. And like, you can't just will yourself into that decision. You need to actually have an infrastructure, people who will answer the phone, who will help you make that appointment, who will fundraise into the funds, who will litigate to make sure you can get out of state. Like, that requires that level of sustainability. So it's really focusing on the infrastructure and then also being clear that, part of what they are trying to do is destroy the infrastructure. And so we have to fight like hell to protect it.
That's right. And my final question for you is around convincing other people who are borderline. We know we're not going to change the people who are on the other side of the fence, right? They're gone. So I'm not going to worry about them. But there are people who are ambivalent, who are that could be convinced to care, but hold a lot of power. I wouldn't call them allies because they're not allies yet. So how do you create allies, I guess is the question. And what are some tactics that you've used over these last, really 3 or 4 years to build more allies and get more people from center over?
Yeah. So first, I would just go back to like public opinion has stayed pretty consistent, if not gone up, around kind of protecting access because people do, understand now more than ever that abortion bans have made pregnancy more dangerous. Okay. That they have put pregnancy outcomes in the realm of potential criminalization, both for patients and doctors. And like, that's not a world and a system that they want to live in. So the storytelling of the real life scenarios, Kate Cox in Texas, who had to leave, and really risked her further fertility because of the draconian laws where she couldn't get the access in Texas, or the story of Brittany Watts, right? Young African-American woman in Ohio who, literally criminalized for a miscarriage. And I do think that really showing how those experiences have created more harm and that anybody could be in that situation. Like I said, I have millions of people who are just like, okay, I don't know if I can show up at that conference. One board member who literally left. She was having some spotting in a late term of her pregnancy and she just left a banned state. She came in for a meeting and was like, I got to go. The doctor was like, do not go to the hospital there. Go home, come home. So those are the kinds of things, right, that when it becomes real, right, of like what it actually, and you can imagine that happening to your sister, your friend, your colleague. Yes. And so storytelling, I think, is a big piece of it. Understanding the fact that the majority of people are with you is a big piece of it. I think for the people that are truly on the line, it's really a question around understanding where they are as a matter of personal choice. Does not mean that their choice should be the ones that govern everybody. So, people, I'm a Christian woman, a woman of faith, and I have many conversations with people who are like, well, that's not, I wouldn't do, right? I'm not asking what you would do, right? I'm asking if you would use your faith to tell everyone else what their decision should be. And you should be in the middle of their relationship with God. That's not who we are, should be. And I think that using those kinds of questions and conversations to say, this is exactly why we don't believe the government should be in the middle of these decisions. This is exactly why pastors should not be in the middle of these decisions, that these are private medical decisions that people are making based on their own life circumstances and trajectory. The majority of people who seek access to abortion are already parents. They have made a decision that where their family is an ending, right? And they know what it takes to be a parent, right? And to take that away and to say, now we're going to be in the middle of, not if you're going to become a parent, or how many times you're going to be a parent or how, right? If they take away IVF, it's like all of those things factor in. And I just find we're gaining more support. This is not a partisan issue. It has never been, but it's like, really not a partisan issue because you don't get states like Kansas and Kentucky and Montana and Ohio without seeing the kind of cross movement, cross-cultural work of folks who are engaging in these conversations. So that's my hope, right, is that we've actually brought together a coalition of folks that are really ready to stand in strong support of reproductive freedom. And, that's what I see happening every day.
Absolutely. Well, Alexis, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of women everywhere, but also I think just how you have led the organization through one of the most challenging times and are going to continue to do so. I just really want to say thank you. And also thank you for pushing businesses and corporations to, fill the gap and take a stance. And to your point, the actual point of it is you're really not taking that much of a stance. Like this is a bare minimum.
Yeah, exactly.
Out on the back, but not
really. They didn't even really make up the bed. They just put the comforter on and fluffed up a pillow.
That's right. And I think that that's actually a really insightful thing for me as a takeaway is know the data, know the sentiment, know kind of where you stand, because sometimes the assumption because of public perception or conversations or PR is that this is contentious, but it actually may not be contentious. So understand kind of where we are, narrative shaping, understanding the stories, and putting some color behind the decisions. These are real people. We are real people. Whether it's personal or not personal, you can have empathy for another human being in our shared humanity.
Oh, always starting with empathy, always starting and leading with empathy, I think is really important, not reducing people to their biases, and engaging in conversations with real storytelling. I think that is actually the key to, continuing to move this forward. And it's why I think we're enjoying the majority support that we do now.
Exactly. Well, thank you again. And folks, if you all want to continue to support or engage with Planned Parenthood, how can they do that, Alexis?
They can go on to plannedparenthood.org and see, find ways to support, to engage. They can identify their local affiliate and find ways to be on the ground supporting, which is always incredible. They can support abortion funds, local funds that help their local patients get out of state if they need to, and other local independent providers who are also sharing the really critical work of keeping the infrastructure and the HOPE infrastructure alive for patients across this country.
Awesome. All righty. Thank you so much. See you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Journey podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review and head to our Instagram and YouTube to leave a comment. I look forward to hearing how this podcast has made an impact on your own journey.